All right, welcome everyone. I guess this is a triple header this week for me, and this is the third stream of the week, and this will round out the week. As you've probably noticed, I've been doing more live streams with guests, and I have been doing just my own streams, the Malware Monday series. So I do promise to get back to that soon. Joining today is Doug Burks, creator founder of Security Onion and Security Onion Solutions. Security Onion is the very well known project, and then the company, of course, that provides a lot of great services around that. I'm going to just kind of skip all the channel administration. Today's been a day where I've just been, I feel like, behind the power curve from the moment I woke up. So I'm just going to go ahead and welcome Doug. So Doug, thanks for taking time to join the stream today. It's awesome to get a chance to connect with you. I think the last time I was able to see you was probably a Security Onion conference a couple of years ago in Augusta. I know there's been some unfortunate weather here that's prevented that from this year. So looking forward to just hearing, like what you have, maybe a little bit of history, a little bit about yourself and about the project. So we'll cover all of that here in a moment. But welcome to the channel, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. As we were talking before we started the stream, a lot of my the community that I've been trying to create over the years is focused around malware analysis, reverse engineering. Sometimes I know as REs we can get pretty siloed into our world of reversing tools. Would you mind maybe sharing just a little bit of like the background and the history of Security Onion? When did it come about? Why you created it? What is it for? I guess for anyone who's not familiar.
Sure. So I actually have a quick timeline. If I can go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Let's share the screen. And
And while you're doing that, hi Travis, hi Jason. Great to see you guys here.
all right. So if I did this correctly, you should see a browser window with a timeline on it.
Yep, looks good here. I got your
So
full looks like your full desktop.
yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully no sensitive information will pop up.
Yep.
We'll keep our fingers crossed there.
Yeah.
So, going back to the very beginning, I've been a computer nerd since I was 6 years old. I got a computer, a little Commodore 16. I hooked it up to the TV and was instantly hooked on this world of computers. When I was in middle school, I read The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll, and that kind of opened my
Mm.
eyes to this world of cybersecurity. It wasn't even a term back then. It was just this guy, Cliff Stoll, who happened to catch this German hacker stealing United States information and selling it to the Russian KGB. And as a middle schooler who did not enjoy reading, I stayed up all night long reading this book because I couldn't put it down. It was so amazing. And again, that wasn't really an industry. I wasn't even thinking about it as a profession at the time. I just thought it was cool. And so, fast forward to, graduating from high school, starting college, I got my computer science degree. And by the time I got my degree, this cybersecurity industry had really started to take off. And I said, well, that's really what I'm passionate about. I'd love to do that for a living. And, I want to be Cliff Stoll. I want to catch
Mhm.
bad guys and I want
Mhm.
to kick them out of networks. And so I got really focused on learning as much as I could about network defense and enterprise defense, and took just about every SANS certification that I could, became a SANS GSE, and all of these things. Began teaching a little bit for SANS, so that was a lot of fun. But in the process of all that, one of the things that I kind of realized was that and this actually happened somewhat because of handling an incident, of actually finding an adversary who had broken into a network that I was responsible for defending. And I could tell by looking at the HTTP user agent strings that this attacker was using Backtrack Linux, which is, of course,
Mhm.
now called Kali Linux. And, I had been aware of Backtrack Linux for many years at that point. And I kind of, this thought hit me, these bad guys, whether they're real adversaries or maybe just red teamers, pen testers, they've got this tremendous advantage of this pre-compiled tool set in Backtrack Linux or Kali Linux. And where is the equivalent for blue teamers? That's fundamentally unjust that we as
Hmm.
defenders don't have the same capabilities ready to go at a moment's notice. And, I spent years on open source mailing lists for things like Snort and Suricata and Bro, and, just watching folks over and over again spending days, weeks, or months just trying to compile these individual tools and then start to try to integrate them together to build that platform that they needed to give them the visibility that they were looking for in their enterprises. And so, I realized pretty quickly that this is my life's mission now. I have to build this platform so that folks can just download an ISO image as easily as Backtrack or Kali and answer a few questions, click next, finish, and get this capability up and running. And so that's kind of what you see there in the timeline. I started building this thing way back in 2008. Took
Hmm.
several months to build that first version and release that first version in 2009. And over the years, just kind of, continued to build on this thing as a hobby project on the side. It was the tool set that I needed and, figured others might benefit from it as well. And so slowly but surely, folks started downloading it, and we built a community. Started with a Google Groups mailing list, and
Hmm.
did all the things that you do to start up a community, and write up documentation, and ask as you're interacting with folks on the mailing list. Use that interaction to improve the documentation, improve the software itself. And the next big thing that you see on the timeline there is 2012, the big distro rebuild. So I basically, after 3 years of it being out in the world, took all of that feedback that we had and said, okay, now it's time to start over from scratch, rebuild everything. And so we did that. That took a long time, and but it was very successful. It answered a lot of questions that folks had, and it solved a lot of problems that folks had.
Hmm.
And so that kind of brings us to like the 2013 timeframe, and on
Was
into
that
20.
so? Was that in like an intentional start the project, let it grow for a little bit, and then learn and re-architect, or did that just come from those initial years and it did become maybe like an apparent or a more obvious? The only reason I ask is I've talked to a lot of open source projects lately that it seems like they build the craft over the years, like those initial architectural design decisions kind of get stuck with you as you move into a project that makes it 10, 15,
Yeah,
20 years.
that's exactly right. When I started this thing in 2008, I had no idea that I would still be doing this today,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
You kind of have these grand dreams that, maybe this could catch on and maybe it could be something big, but
Hmm.
no real concrete plans to say, I'm going to build this thing for 15 years, right? That was not
Hmm.
really a serious thought in my head at the time. So, back in 2008, that first version, it was a whole lot different than what we have today. Back then, it was, essentially an Ubuntu Live CD that
Hmm.
had several different things pre-compiled, such as Snort and Squeal, which was the GUI back then. Um, and I built a graphical setup wizard so that you could click next, finish, and you could configure all of these things for, monitoring traffic from your Ethernet 0 or your Ethernet 1, whatever the case may be for your box at the time. And but that initial version was very rough, and it was built in my spare time. So I've got 30 minutes here, I've got an
Yeah.
hour
Yeah.
here to work on that. And so everything was just very quick and dirty. And um, so as more folks started using it, it became readily apparent that there was a lot of work to do. There was a lot of technical debt that had to be repaid. And so that's kind of what that first big distro rebuild was taking all of our components and building them into real Ubuntu packages. And that was a Herculean effort in and of itself. If anybody has not had the pleasure of building Debian packages, it's not something that I would wish on my worst enemy. It's not a fun process, especially when you're talking about. I think at the time we were upwards of 150 different packages that we were building and maintaining over time.
Mm.
But that, solved a lot of issues for folks, and that, it was packages that could be hosted on Ubuntu Launchpad, and they're, signed by proper keys so that,
Mhm.
things couldn't be tampered with. And, it made it more of an enterprisey distro than
Yeah.
just kind of the quick and dirty thing that it was back in 2008. And so because of that, that was kind of the stepping stone, or the leap to the next generation and things to come. And at that point in time, security onion was still a side hobby for me. And my full-time job, I was the deputy chief security officer at Mandiant. I worked for Richard Baitlick, who I had, been a longtime fan and follower of, read every, book that he had written and every blog post that he had ever written for many, many years.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it was, a tremendous opportunity to work for somebody that I had admired for a long time and looked up to. And so I had this great job, amazing boss, wonderful company. But at the same time, I had folks that were coming to me on the side saying, "Hey, we're deploying Security Onion in production, and we need things like training and professional services and turnkey appliances and all these things." So I was kind of at a crossroads, and I had a decision to make. So ultimately, I took a leap of faith. I left Mandiant and FireEye, and I started Security Onion Solutions in 2014. And it was a risk, but it was a calculated risk.
Mhm.
I knew that there was opportunity there, and I wanted to see how far I could take this thing, in terms of helping, make a difference in the lives of defenders. And so, started the company. I was a one-man band for several years. In 2016, I brought on my chief operating officer, Phil Planamira, and we've steadily grown the company since then as we kind of moved down that timeline. In 2018, we announced our appliances. So we started selling hardware appliances. We now have cloud appliances as
Mhm.
well. As the years rolled on, we continued to grow the team. And then in 2020, we released Security Onion 2. So before then, I mentioned before that our releases were based on Ubuntu. And so our version schemes kind of mirrored that Ubuntu version number. So there was Security Onion 12.04 and Security Onion 14.04 and
Mm.
16.04 to mirror the Ubuntu versions. But in 2020, we said, okay, now it's time to do that ground up rebuild again.
Mm.
And again, it wasn't something that I had planned from 2008. That 12 years later, that we would go and do this grand rebuild, but it was driven based on feedback from our community, feedback from our paying customers. We need to go those next steps towards being even more enterprisey. So we, instead of building things in Ubuntu packages, we moved into Docker images. So all of our components are Docker based now. All of those Docker images are orchestrated by SaltStack.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so that way that, it's very easy to make sure that all the configurations are in a coherent and consistent fashion. And that's continued to propel us to the next level. We also, took that opportunity to make the architecture much more scalable along the way.
Mm.
And so again, it kind of gets back to paying off technical debt. We had a lot of legacy components that we got rid of, and took the opportunity to build fresh, modern web interfaces to do the kind of things that we need to do as defenders. And so, that was a tremendous engineering effort. Over many years it took to build that version of Security Onion 2. And oh, by the way, I should probably mention the fact that even though we started off as a network monitoring solution, it was readily apparent to me within a couple of years of the project that, as more and more of our network traffic becomes encrypted, that then becomes somewhat of a blind spot for us as defenders. So it's important for us to fill in those blind spots with endpoint visibility. And
Mhm.
so, even from the first few years of the project, we've tried to be as equally powerful on the host-based side as we are on the network side. And we've continued to iterate on that approach throughout the years. Um, and also very balanced when it comes to different deployment techniques. You can deploy Security Onion on a small, minimal virtual machine on your laptop, or you can go to the opposite end of the spectrum and do a large enterprise deployment where you have a manager node, you have several different search nodes that are built into an Elastic cluster, and then you may have hundreds or possibly even thousands of network sensors deployed throughout your enterprise with honeypot nodes and collecting logs from endpoint agents as well. And so we've tried to maintain that whole spectrum of easy to use for small deployments, but also scalable to large enterprise deployments. And then the other thing where we've tried to remain balanced is those deployments where it may be on different kinds of networks. For example, traditional IT networks that are connected to the internet and can get their updates via the internet versus air gap networks where you're totally disconnected, and so you're going to sneakernet an ISO image across that air gap and do your updates that way. And so, throughout the years, it's been really a labor of love to say, okay, here's our platform, and here's all of these use cases that we have to fulfill and we have to continue to support as we're kind of changing the tires on the car that's going down the highway at 80 miles an hour, right? And so never a dull moment. There's always a new challenge that comes up, but it's been a lot of fun. And so that kind of brings us into 2020 and 2022. We added a bunch of new features to our web interface, and that's kind of what we have highlighted here. We added, in addition to our alert web interface that we had built, it's a custom interface that we built based on what we've always wanted as defenders. One of our taglines is by defenders for defenders. So we build the kind of interfaces that we want to use on a daily basis. And to further that point, one of the things that I do every morning when I get up is I go and do some threat hunting, whether that's on our company network or on my home network. I'm going to use our software to go and do some threat hunting, some incident response, and make sure that we're still meeting that goal of being effective and efficient, and meeting our mantra of by defenders for defenders. And if I'm in that mode of doing my daily threat hunting, and I say, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could do this? That's how we get the inspiration for new features. That's how we improve our web interfaces, whether it's for alerts or our dashboards interface that you see the screenshot of there. We've got a separate hunting interface, which is a little bit more focused on threat hunting specifically. We built a case management interface so that, as you're responding to alerts, as you're doing your threat hunting, you're escalating those items of interest into a case, and then you're adding all of your artifacts and observables to that case as you ultimately work that case to a close. And that might be, you as an individual working that case, or it might be your entire security operations center working as a team, collaborating on that case. Again, we've built all that functionality into this free and open platform that anybody can download regardless of your budget. Go and download this and use it to defend and monitor your enterprise.
Yeah, and that's just securityonionsolutions.com, correct?
Yes.
Get you to the images, and I imagine it's been a little while since I've looked at it. The role I'm in now, oddly enough, I didn't know you were at Mandiant. I'm now at Mandiant, although Mandiant is Google, and so it's kind of this weird world of like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and like another piece connected for me, and Richard too. I've met him once or twice over the years. There's so much value. I mean, not only in this complete stack that you've created, but even at times I'll log into it and I'll say, I just want to see how you created this dashboard, or there's some little component too. And so there's just this never ending, amount of resources that are available in projects like this. So it's really awesome that you're providing that to the community for free and have for so many years. What do you think is maybe the easiest for anyone that's maybe new to Security Onion? Like, what would you recommend as a way to get started? Because there's a lot there, so it can be a bit overwhelming or maybe feel a bit daunting to deploy it, to get data in it, to start utilizing it and really understanding what it's about and how to use it?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question really in two different ways, and I'll start here on this introduction page of our documentation. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is not just the software itself, but the documentation.
Mm,
We've heard from several folks that we've got amazing documentation, some of the best documentation out there. I mean, you mentioned Richard Baitlick. He says himself that we are one of the most well documented projects around.
mm,
And that means a lot coming from him because
yeah.
obviously he's a very talented writer and author. And I highly respect his opinion. So,
Mhm.
our documentation is a great place to start. And we've got this introduction page that kind of lays the groundwork of what that looks like. And when we built this diagram to really kind of showcase, just at a glance, what a deployment might look like in terms of monitoring network traffic, not just from a north-south perspective of traffic that's exiting and entering the enterprise, but also from an east-west perspective of an adversary that's pivoting laterally throughout the environment. And as I mentioned before, more and more of our network traffic is encrypted. So we're not going to
Mhm.
place all of our eggs in the network basket. We're going to, make sure that we're collecting logs from endpoints as well, whether that's your servers, your workstations, your laptops, even to things like, collecting syslog from your firewalls, your routers, things like that. Bring that all back into Security Onion. And now you've got that one pane of glass that all the vendors talk about, but we really try to take that to the next level and make sure that all of that data is very easily correlated so that you can pivot from a network-based IDS alert into full packet capture. You can see that entire TCP stream, but also at the same time, you can pivot to the endpoint log and you can see the
Mm,
process that was running on that Windows laptop as they downloaded malware and the series of events that kicked off. So that introduction page of the documentation is a great place to get started. And I'll follow that up with a more direct answer to your question, which is we actually have a page called First Time Users in our documentation. And so if you are a first time user, if you've never used a platform before, that's the place where you want to go. And that will walk you through downloading our ISO image, spinning it up in a minimal virtual machine. You really only have to have like 4 GB of RAM in the VM, and you can install that in just a few minutes. And what that's going to allow you to do in that sort of minimal configuration, you're going to install in import mode, which means you can import a PCAP file or an EVTX file.
mm,
And then at that point, you'll be able to, review that PCAP file or EVTX file just like it were, live network traffic or live logs coming from a Windows host. And so this first time users page, it walks you step by step through that installation, through the configuration, and through really kind of each of the web interfaces that we've built to do all of those things from alerting to dashboards to hunting to case management, et cetera.
okay. Question, if you are
Sure.
ready for the first one. Um, this comes from LinkedIn. And I think this is again kind of an interesting, as you know, and I don't know if everyone in the channel knows, but I have some history with OISF, which is the nonprofit that runs or supports the Suricata project. And so, I have some history with network security monitoring. It's certainly still an area that I think is, as a malware analyst and maybe more of an RE role, is kind of underutilized for a lot of folks I see. But anyway, sorry, that was real rambly. Performance is an interesting part. That's what I was just trying to get at. And that's the question. Do you have suggestions, resources for how do you calculate resource requirements for using it as a SIM?
It's a great question, and it's something that comes up all the
Yeah,
time.
great
And
question. Horrible delivery. Sorry for that. I guess it's Friday and my mind's already starting to check out or
I,
something.
I quite understand. It is definitely Friday, and it is about to be weekend o'clock. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. It comes up all the time,
Hmm.
and so we've got a dedicated page in the documentation for hardware requirements, and this kind of steps you through, number one, all the different deployment scenarios we have from what we just discussed previously, which is an import installation. That's the minimum hardware requirements. That's going to be 4 GB of RAM, 2 CPU cores, 50 gigs of storage. It's very simple, very minimal. You can then go many steps across that spectrum to the opposite end, which is a large enterprise deployment, again, of hundreds or thousands of nodes. And if you're a large enterprise monitoring lots of network traffic, you may get into a situation where you need one of those AMD EPYC processors that has like 256 cores, and you may need something like 384 gigabytes of RAM. But it all depends on the amount of network traffic you're looking at, the actual EPS of logs that are coming in if you're consuming logs from endpoints. And we've got a lot of guidance on this hardware requirements page for how you do that. From all those different deployments, between import to evaluation mode to production deployments. We've got different guidelines here for network interfaces, standalone deployments, and then we get into distributed deployments where you have a manager node, you have backend search nodes, you have forward nodes, which are the sensors, and so on and so forth. So all that's really kind of documented there. And then, the final kind of piece of that puzzle is, as good as we try to make our documentation, there's always going to be questions. There are always going to be corner cases that cannot be fully covered by the documentation. So we also have an active community on GitHub discussions. The short way to get to that is securityonion.net/discuss. And that's, you go there, you ask a question, and, the community is very responsive. We as a company are very responsive to GitHub discussions because we want to make sure that folks are having a good experience with the platform. And again, it comes back to what I said before about, we take all that feedback from that user experience, even if it's, users out in the community that are just using the free software. We take that and, try to improve upon the documentation, try to improve upon the software itself based on that feedback that we're getting from GitHub discussions. So, take a look at the documentation. If your questions aren't answered there, go to discussions and we'll try to help you out along the way.
Okay, awesome.
So some other things we can kind of talk about are the actual web interfaces that I kind of mentioned in passing, but we can take a little bit deeper dive into each of those interfaces and ultimately look at really kind of a live demo in a few minutes. But I talked about how we built our own alerts interface. And I mentioned earlier in the discussion about how one of the original versions of Security Onion included a graphical user interface called Squeal. That was the Snort GUI for Lamers. That was the acronym.
Yeah, that's right.
And yep, and it was a great interface. And I caught lots of bad guys using Squeal, and so I will love Squeal till the day that I die because of how powerful it was. And so when it came time for us to build our own alerts web interface, it's heavily inspired by Squeal. What does that mean? Well, again, it's by defenders for defenders. And that tagline actually comes from back in the old Squeal days. It was by analysts for analysts. So we're kind of riffing on that. But one of the things that Squeal got right was that if you're an enterprise and you're monitoring lots of network traffic with Snort or Suricata, what have you, you're going to have lots of IDS alerts. That's just a given, right? So one of your jobs is going to be triaging all of those alerts, determining, are they true positives or false positives? If they're true positives, do I even care about them? Do I need to engage the incident response process? And so that's really what our alerts interface is really kind of focused around is, hey, give me this high level overview of the alerts that I have, and let's aggregate them based on the actual Suricata alert string, the message from that alert. And, so that gives me a count. I've got 239 instances of this particular IDS alert. And that allows me to very quickly at a glance get a feel for what's happening in my enterprise, as opposed to many other commercial IDS vendors out there that, they may take and just display a huge list one by one of all of these thousands or millions of alerts. I've used systems like that in the past, and they're just not conducive to effective daily alert response. And so that was one of the first things we did, was build this idea of, you've got alerts that are being aggregated together, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do with each and every one of those. It's not a great idea for those just to sit there and be ignored. So let's figure out, are we going to say this is a true positive and I need to engage the incident response process, and maybe that'll play into the case management interface that we'll get to in a minute? Or is this a false positive and I need to go and tune my rule set so that I disable this rule so that I never see it again? Or maybe I need to get a little bit more granular and fine tune that alert to say, I never want to see that again for this subnet or this particular IP address. And so that will get into the detections interface, which we just released this year, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. And so, all of these things are integrated together so that it's literally one click to go from an alert in the alerts interface over to a case in the case management interface, or over to the detections interface so that I can tune the alert. Whatever we need to do, it's all right there at our fingertips. And so, I also mentioned before the capability of taking an IDS alert and being able to pivot to different data types. Again, that comes from my love of Squeal from back in the day. So one of the things that I always want to do when I'm looking at a network-based IDS alert is show me the entire TCP stream for that alert. It's great that we have an alert and we get some packet context within that alert itself. And there's ways that you can, configure Suricata to get more context and things like that. But I love to see that entire TCP stream, and that really helps me out as a defender to figure out, do I care about this thing? And if so, what do I need to do about it? And so that's a pivot that's built right into our alerts interface. I also mentioned, this capability of, hey, I need to go from that network-based IDS alert, and I want to do a correlation to see what other kind of logs I have beyond just network logs. I mean, I might have some network metadata. So if this is it's an attack over HTTP, I might have some HTTP metadata logs that go along with it. But even apart from that, I might have some logs from my firewall that might be correlatable. I might have some logs from my endpoints to say, this is the process that initiated on this laptop that then initiated that HTTP traffic. So I can build a more complete picture of what actually happened. So we built all of those pivot and correlation capabilities right into this alert management interface. And so, as powerful as that is, I think we all kind of understand at this point in the cybersecurity industry that IDS alerts are great, but modern adversaries, especially nation state adversaries, are quite competent at evading network-based IDS signatures. And so it's critically important that we not just rely on IDS alerts firing for us to do our jobs. We need to be able to do some threat hunting. And so we went and built our own dashboards interface, which is not just dashboards for the sake of building dashboards, not just for the sake of making pretty pictures, but dashboards that are actually actionable. And again, it goes back to the same kind of capabilities we talked about for alerting. And that's that, if I go to my dashboards and I say, show me the HTTP dashboard, okay, I get a listing of all of my HTTP metadata, and that's great. But then where can I go from there? Well, I can correlate. If I find an interesting HTTP log, I can correlate to other logs. Again, maybe that's logs on an endpoint that initiated those HTTP transactions. I can pivot from the HTTP log to full packet capture. I can do all of these things regardless of the fact of, am I starting from an IDS alert or not? If I'm doing threat hunting, I'm probably not starting from an alert. I'm starting from just a query, maybe a hypothesis to say, if there was an adversary that was in my environment and they were kind of hiding in the shadows, maybe they might do this kind of lateral movement. So maybe I might craft a particular query to look for that. And then from there, if I find something that matches what I'm looking for, maybe then I might need to start escalating to cases, building that case, including all the additional context and all the additional correlations that we can dig out of all of that background data. So that's kind of our dashboards interface. And we've built lots and lots of default dashboards right out of the box so that you don't have to be an expert in building queries, whether it's, you don't have to understand everything about Elasticsearch or Lucene or our own Onion query language. You just click the drop-down box and pick one of our pre-built dashboards, and it'll bring up the information for you. So that kind of dovetails into our next interface, which is Hunt, which is really closely related to dashboards. It's almost identically the same interface. The main difference being that those pre-built dashboards in Hunt are not called dashboards, they're hunting queries, and they're aimed with a little bit different target. They're more specifically targeted at threat hunting rather than dashboards, which is more of an overview. Give me an overview of all the SSL certificates that I've seen. Give me an overview of all the DNS lookups that I've seen. Whereas when I go to Hunt, those pre-built Hunt queries are much more targeted. They're much more focused on, okay, show me not just all of the HTTP logs, but show me all of the HTTP user agent strings, because I'm really interested in looking for strange and unusual user agent strings. And so again, all of those queries are built right into Hunt. And you can build your own, you can save your own queries if you find something that's effective for your organization. We realize that some of the most powerful queries for an individual's organization is going to be ones that they write themselves based on their unique knowledge of their unique environment. So we make it very easy for you to, whether you're starting from some of our default queries and modifying based on that, or you're just starting from scratch, you can write your own queries, you can save them, you can bookmark them, do whatever you need to do.
Do you think with and I think that's a really important point is, individuals gain that knowledge, that intimate knowledge of their unique network. You're talking about hunting, of course, which is looking for anomalies. I would assume then that you could use this to also help build your baseline, your understanding of your network, by looking at some of these dashboards and other visualizations, and not just network traffic then, but activity that's going on the host. Is that a common use case? Is it used for that? Do you suggest doing that? I'm just kind of thinking off the cuff here a little bit, because that seems like that knowledge, the few times I've tried to understand, for example, like what's baseline activity from an active domain, Active Directory domain, it can be challenging to do that.
That's exactly right. And that's absolutely a valid use case. It's one that I've used in the past. And I'll give you a great example. Many years ago, I was called in kind of as a consultant to an enterprise, and they were like, Doug, we got these weird alerts from our firewall that we've never seen before, and we're concerned that there's just some really crazy stuff going on here. And, it's one of those situations where firewall vendors, they try to help you out. They try to provide additional context and, try to give you some alerts to alert you to things that are going on. But a lot of times they just don't provide enough context for you to really understand, what does that alert actually mean? What is it actually trying to tell me?
Yeah.
And so I said, guys, I don't have experience with that firewall that you're running. I can't help you decipher what that alert is trying to tell you. So the best thing we can do is fire up Security Onion and have it monitor the traffic. And let's use that to build a baseline of your environment and see if we can prove or disprove what this firewall is saying. And sure enough, we were able to, within a matter of minutes, really kind of disprove what the firewall was saying. It was a very simplistic signature that this firewall vendor had deployed. And I'm sure it made sense in some context, but it didn't make sense in
Mm,
this context. And
sure.
so it was truly a false positive, but we couldn't really determine that until we had a more neutral view of the network that was not constrained to just that firewall vendor's perspective.
Hmm.
Um, I think another great example is another customer that I was called into many years ago. We I taught a 4-day training class on their facility, and on day 5 we actually did some live threat hunting in their environment.
Mm,
And so within a few minutes, just in looking at connection logs, had narrowed in on a particular IP address that was sending this traffic that appeared to be a beacon. It was roughly every minute or so out to a foreign country. And as you start investigating this, it's like, okay, that's a red flag, that's a red flag, that's a red flag. It
hmm.
started looking pretty grim. It started looking pretty bad, right?
Hmm.
Um, but long story short, after several hours of trying to, you know, poke and prod at system owners and, figure out what was going on, in the end, what it turned out to be, I was looking at the security onion logs and specifically at the destination IP address that was in this log. And I noticed that it was something like 192.186 dot something dot something. And I kind of scratched my head and I said, that's kind of like 192.168,
Hmm.
but it was 186 instead. I was like, is that is it possible that somebody like made a typo?
Yeah,
And, and
sure.
and as it turned out, this was a database server that was supposed to be configured to replicate to an internal database server at 192.168. Whatever. But in fact, they had fat fingered it. They made a typo. And so
Mm,
because of
mhm.
that, it was trying to replicate out to this foreign country. Right. And so, that's one of those situations where there were no alerts for that. Like Security Onion didn't generate any alerts for that. We didn't find that until we started looking just at raw connection logs, just in sort of a threat hunting kind of a approach. And you never really know what you're going to find until you start looking, and you start looking with that right mindset of, does this make sense?
Mhm,
And uh, it gets back to your point about baseline. Like, does this match my mental model for the baseline of my environment? And if I'm new to this environment, which I was new to that environment, I didn't have a mental baseline going into that of what that environment looked like. But I have all this data at my fingertips to help me very quickly build that mental model of what that baseline should look like. What's normal for that network? What's abnormal? This stuck out like a sore thumb. And thank goodness that it wasn't an actual, incident. It wasn't actually beaconing. It wasn't command and control type stuff.
mhm,
But this was nevertheless something that was an important finding, right? If we had not found this thing would have been continued to send database replication traffic out to some foreign country, which could have been bad in and of itself, right?
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
not to mention, you go to utilize that that, how many times in a ransomware scenario do you hear folks, like you test your backups, right? Because your backups are gone.
right.
Situations like that first comes to mind. Maybe that's not feasible, but it certainly seems like I would be quite shocked if I thought I had my database replicated. I never really confirmed that it was, and then I find out in a situation where I need them, they're not there, or the last time it synced was a year ago before I made this change. It ultimately ended up in a typo.
Exactly. That's
Let
exactly
alone I
right.
couldn't imagine you get a data breach because you're accidentally replicating to some server across the internet that just
Bingo.
happened to pick up on the traffic. I mean, that would be a wild story.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to make sure that I do spend some time covering case management and our new detections interface. So I mentioned this a couple of times now. Our case management
Hey, Doug,
interface.
do you think you could maybe zoom in just a little bit on the
Does that help?
you switch screens. I don't know if that was intentional.
Oh, I didn't realize I switched screens.
Yeah, I see.
Sending.
Well, I see your cases. Yeah, that looks great.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we built our own case management interface, again, with this idea that we want to design a case management interface by defenders for defenders. We want to be able to escalate events, whether it's an alert or a log that we found from threat hunting, create a new case, and then add all of our observables, all of our indicators, and everything that we need into that case. We can set our traffic light protocol status to say this is TLP red or TLP green or whatever the case may be. So if we need to share the information with others, we've got all that marked and categorized properly. And ultimately working that case to a close. And then we've got things built into cases like analyzers. So if you have IP addresses that you've associated with that case, you can go and say, hey, VirusTotal, what do you know about this IP address? Or Team Cumbery malware hash registry. Have you ever seen this particular hash before? Things like that. And so, again, we want to make sure that, our Security Onion console, as we call it, this web interface, really has all the tools and components that you need to build your security operations center and do everything soup to nuts from, monitoring network traffic, collecting logs, getting alerts, reviewing alerts, triaging alerts, doing threat hunting, opening cases, working cases, closing cases, and that whole life cycle and everything along the way. And so that's a brief glimpse at cases, but our big news for this year is detections. And I did touch on this before in the
Mhm.
context of the alerts interface. And the idea is that, if you've got network-based IDS rules that are loaded into Suricata, you've got lots of alerts firing all the time as your network traffic is being analyzed. We also have several other kinds of rules as well. So we have Sigma rules that are used by ElastAlert. We have YAR rules that are used by Strelka. And
Mhm.
so, depending on how you've configured Security Onion, by default, we use Zeek to monitor network traffic and find files of interest and extract those files. And those extracted files then get analyzed by Strelka using those YAR rules and some other neat magic that they have. And then we have Sigma rules that say, if you're consuming logs from, let's say, a Windows laptop, and if you see this specific pattern of events, then you fire this Sigma alert that says, go and check into this Windows laptop and see what's going on there. And so it's great that you have all of these rules at your fingertips in Security Onion. And it's great that those rules can generate all of these alerts that you can then triage in our alerts interface and do your full investigation and work through your case via our cases interface. But there is always the issue of false positives and tuning and things like that. And that's what this detections interface is designed for. So we spent really 9 months straight working on this detections interface, again, with the mantra of by defenders for defenders. We want to make sure that we have the ability to do all the detection engineering stuff that we need to be able to do in terms of, okay, for this rule, I want to disable it altogether. I never want to see it again, ever, ever. For this other rule, maybe I want to be a little bit more granular with it and fine tune it to say, okay, I do want to run this rule, but I only want it to alert for this database server over here that I really care about, or I only want it to monitor this email server or this web server, or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be. And so we give you all that capability in detections. Um, we allow you to write your own detections and load them into this user interface, whether that's kind of writing one detection at a time, or maybe you have your own GitHub repo of detections that you've already written, and you just want to kind of consume your own detections from that repo. We've got lots of power baked into this interface for managing detections at scale. Just like I talked about before with Security Onion as a platform, we make sure that we're usable everywhere along that spectrum, from the small deployments all the way to the large enterprise deployments. It's the same thing for detections, whether you're deploying just a small security onion platform or a large enterprise deployment with lots and lots of different rules between Suricata, Elastalert, and Strelka. We want you to be able to manage those quickly and efficiently through one web interface that's integrated with everything else. And oh, by the way, you can do things like bulk enabling, bulk disabling. If you want to go into your emerging threats open rule set, which I know you're intimately familiar with, and say, for this category of rules, just disable the entire category, right? That then becomes a very powerful way of taking that emerging threats open rule set of 40 or 50,000 rules and cutting it down to something that's much more manageable for most enterprises. So that's really kind of the brief overview of our interfaces, and I'll just do a very quick demo here of our detections interface, and I can zoom in if this is a little bit small.
Just a little bit would help, I think.
Is that better?
Yeah, that looks pretty good.
So this is one of my production security onion deployments here at my house, and this is a standalone security onion deployment. So everything's installed on one box. And here you can see I've got 58,000 detections. 53 of those are for Suricata. Those come from the emerging threats open rule set. 3,000, almost 4,000 are Yara rules. Those get loaded into Strelka. And then over 1,600 are Sigma rules. They get loaded into Elastalert. So the vast majority of those rules are Suricata rules coming from the emerging threats open rule set. So again, this detections interface is very similar to our dashboards interface in that, these tables that we build are dynamic and you can interact with them. So they're not just like static dashboards. So if I wanted to say, I've got emerging threats open, I've got all these different categories. Maybe I want to say, exclude the malware category, exclude the exploit kit category. This isn't actually modifying the rule set. This is just updating my view of the rule set right now. And this helps me kind of drill into, do I care about this category? Do I not care about this category? That's just some of the slicing and dicing that you can do via the interface. And this is kind of a standard view that we have that's shared between dashboards and hunt and detections, where you have these tables up top that give you kind of the aggregate view, the high level overview. And then when you scroll down to the bottom, you see the detail view of each of the individual rules. So for example, this rule here, it's from the emerging threats rule set. It's in the info category. It's for observed DNS query to .life top level domain. So I can drill into that, and that's going to show me a little bit more information about the rule. And so, one of the things that we just added to detections, which is one of my favorite new features, folks have been asking for a really long time, when are we going to add some sort of AI or ML into Security Onion? And I'm very proud to announce that it's here now. So what we did was we cooked up a scheme to use AI to help defenders, because Josh, I know you've been there because I've been there. When you're looking at rules, especially network-based IDS rules, like this right here, and let me just zoom in a little bit more to make it that much more apparent. That can be a little bit hairy, especially if you're a junior analyst and you're trying to decode what is it that rule is actually looking for, and how am I going to determine, based on my network, is that a true positive or a false positive? Do I care about it? What do I do about it? And this is actually a pretty simplistic rule as far as rules go. There's a lot of them that are much more complex than this. And so, especially when you think about the average defender, may have to triage hundreds or thousands of alerts a day. So do you really have 30 seconds or 60 seconds to try to mentally parse, all of the little content matches and all of the byte offsets and things like that to really understand what's going on? And that's where AI can come in and say, here's an AI summary. This rule detects DNS queries to the .life top level domain, right? And
Mhm.
so that's not insanely detailed, but it's a very quick overview of what that rule is looking for. We'll look at another example here. This is a more complex rule. So if I look at, this is the rule itself. Again, kind of hairy, especially for junior analysts.
Yeah, my brain will immediately seize on that PCRE just because I know it's a regular expression and I'm in for a ride.
Well, it's the old regular expression joke. A programmer had a problem. He said, "Oh, I know. I'll use regular expressions." And now he has two
Yeah.
problems, right? Um, and,
Exactly.
and so, now we look at the AI summary, and this says this rule detects HTTP traffic from a home network to an external network, targeting payloads associated with safe, critics, and flash pack exploit kits. It identifies established connections where the HTTP request URI contains /load, followed by specific patterns ending with .php. Additionally, it checks for the absence of a referrer header in the HTTP request. Like that's pretty simple to understand. It's a whole
Mhm.
lot simpler than trying to parse that Perl compatible regular expression, right?
Mhm.
So we think that this is really a game changer, and it's something that we've wanted to do for a long time. And so this applies not only for network-based IDS rules for the emerging threats open rule set, but we've got things like this rule. This is a Sigma rule.
Mm.
And then we've also got this one as well. I'm sorry, this is a Sigma rule, and the one that we looked at before is a Yara rule. But again, the power of AI to take this big detection logic and break it down into a simple human readable paragraph is really going to be a force multiplier when it
Mhm.
comes to defenders that are trying to understand, why are these alerts firing? Why do I care about it? What do I need to do about it? So that's something that we're tremendously excited about. And again, those AI summaries they're built into our free and open platform. So, that's free of charge. You can go and download Security Onion today, and you can play around with detections. You can play around with the AI summaries. Again, for folks that haven't used the platform before, that first time users page in our documentation is a great way to get started. So you go through that, you import a PCAP or an EVTX file, and then, based on the logs that you have, you can then go into detections. You can see these AI summaries, and you can see how that makes you more effective and efficient as a defender.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exciting stuff. I think the like the next wave of what this capability is going to provide us is going to be really impactful because we're getting this narrative summary of a rule, and imagine when we can start just like natural language asking what's going on, threat hunting with natural language instead of having to craft all these queries and tell me about the sequence of packet events and session. It's just going to be really, really awesome. And that's really cool that this is all just there in Security Onion now for everyone to start playing around with. So I can't wait to check that out myself because um, rule comprehension it can be really challenging. I mean, you as you see, you get, Yara is even more limited because you just have the name of the Yara. Suricata at least has, or IDS rules typically have a message field, which is of arbitrary length, but still very, very terse. It can be really challenging to figure out what that rule is telling you. So I think this is going to be huge.
Yeah, we're tremendously excited about it. Again, it's something that we've wanted to build for a long time. When I'm doing my daily threat hunting and incident response, and we're eating our own dog food or drinking your own champagne, however you want to
Hmm.
phrase that. And this is one of those things that we know that the industry as a whole has needed for a long time. We know that that's a common stumbling block, especially for junior analysts that are new to the field.
Yeah.
And whatever we can do to shorten that time frame of getting junior analysts trained up so that they're can run faster and jump higher as they're in pursuit of the adversaries that are hiding out in their networks. That's what we want to do. We want to accelerate folks. We want to help defenders defend themselves, and that's what we're all about.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've got the link. Let's see. I've got a couple here, but it all starts with securityonionsolutions.com. So that is the place to go. I guess I was kind of thinking, you bring back memories of the last time I was at the conference. This kind of feels like the state of the onion, which is usually your big talk at the event. So it's just great to see and hear all the great things that are going on here. Let's see. Any questions? I know we're going we've gone over just a little over an hour. Hey, Chris, great to see you. Thanks for joining. I was with the Simply Cyber folks and Jerry Ozier yesterday, so it's nice to see a little overlap there in the communities, and hopefully I'll do the same and join some of those streams a little more regular. If anyone has any questions, now's a great time. I think we're probably going to start wrapping up, or we're nearly done. Doug, is there anything else that you'd like to chat about here as we're, I guess, looking at we're now officially, I'm in Central Time. I think you're probably Eastern Time. So
Yeah.
I'm now over 1:00, which means my weekend is like it's started.
Yeah, I'm happy to hang on and answer questions. Again, just to recap, Security Onion is a free and open platform. Folks can download it. Go check out our documentation. It will help you out. If you have questions that aren't answered by the documentation, check out our discussion forum on GitHub Discussions, and we're very helpful there. If you try out Security Onion and you like it, we would love if you could mention us on social media. So we're very active on Twitter, Mastodon, LinkedIn. We'd love for you to, share a kind word and tag at Security Onion, so we can help, spread the word about that, and help spread the word to your colleagues. Beyond social media, if you know of folks that, maybe they're on limited budgets, maybe they, just don't have the tools and capabilities in place that they need because they think that they can't afford the big commercial capabilities. Spread the word, share Security Onion with them, tell them about it, and walk them through what it can give them and things like that. And I feel like we try to do as good of a job with social media as possible and getting the word out, but we're never going to be able to cover everybody on the planet. So it really takes the community really sort of branching out and spreading the word from each of your individual social media channels and word of mouth and things like that.
Yeah, it definitely. I'm personally been trying to build more of a social media presence for my own personal brand, and it's challenging. Absolutely. Couple questions came in. One comment, Travis. I already pulled it up, but I'll give you some more time here. So Travis Green loves the detection interface. Looks awesome. Question from Twitter or X. Sam. So does fleet management contain similar features to the fleet and Elastic with the policy and so on? That question means nothing to me, so hopefully it means something to you.
So, Sam, that's a great question. So, Security Onion does include the Elastic Stack, which includes Elastic Fleet. And so you can go in and deploy Elastic agents out to your servers, laptops, desktops. You can use Elastic Fleet to manage those policies. You can control what logs are being pulled in from those endpoints, what actions are being taken. You can also, because the Elastic agent includes OS query, that means that you can then remotely query those endpoints. So if you find one of your machines has a piece of malware on it, maybe you can take that MD5 hash and you can use OS query to query all of your endpoints to see if that hash shows up anywhere else. Or if there's an interesting looking process running, you can search all of your endpoints for that particular process name or some other characteristic, via the operating system. So you can absolutely use Elastic Fleet. In addition to that, we have our own kind of grid management for security onion nodes specifically. And so all of those nodes they're orchestrated by Salt, and we give you a nice web interface to configure all the aspects of your deployment, and making sure that all of your processes are running and configured as you want them to be configured. And you can do things like reboot security onion nodes if they need a kernel update or whatever the case may be. You can see the CPU statistics, RAM usage, disk usage, things like that. So we give you the capability via Security Onion to manage not only your Security Onion deployment itself, but all of those Elastic agents out throughout your enterprise as well.
Awesome. One other question came in. I'm guessing this one's very similar from LinkedIn, just providing insight on orchestration of Security Onion. So I think you've probably answered both of those questions in one. So must be an important topic, and I would imagine so. I haven't had to work with that level of deployment and agents, and I can only imagine keeping everything checking in line and following your wishes is a big challenge.
It is, and that's been one of our design goals. Is we want it to be the same user experience whether you're managing one node or 1,000. And so for example, my vice president of product, Mike Reeves, he has built and maintained some of the largest sensor grids known to mankind. I can't mention places that he's worked or grids that he's built, but let's just say that 500 nodes, 2,000 nodes, they're amazingly large. And so Security Onion was built with the kind of orchestration technology that enables you to scale to that kind of level. And we want you to be able to administer a 2,000 node grid the same way that you would administer a little virtual machine on your laptop.
Yeah. I have a pfSense firewall as in my network, and mainly it's there to provide me dedicated VLANs for my malware analysis work. And one night I was feeling kind of frisky. I turned Suricata on just to see what kind of alerts would generate. I woke up the next morning, my whole network was dead. Because it turns out when I enabled that service, it just started logging and it filled the logs until the system ran out of disk space and it crashed. And so I spent the next half day recovering. So that's about the extent of my deployment of monitoring networks recently.
It's funny you bring up pfSense. We actually just introduced a new feature, which was developed on OpenSense, which is a fork of pfSense. But I suspect this particular feature would work on pfSense as well. I haven't tested it myself. But the idea is that, just like you were talking about enabling the alerting, pfSense and OpenSense can run Suricata. It can monitor your network traffic from the firewall itself. It can generate alerts. We've actually built in an integration so that you can integrate those firewalls into Security Onion. You can use the detections interface that we just talked about to control your rule sets that then get pulled into those firewalls. And then when they generate alerts, those alerts can then be sent to Security Onion. So it's like at that point, your pfSense or OpenSense firewall is really kind of a Security Onion node. It's kind of a Security Onion sensor that's being fully managed by your Security Onion deployment. So it's pretty slick. If you'll go to our documentation, we've got pages for both pfSense and OpenSense. You can check that out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I didn't mean that as a plug for pfSense, nor as a discouraging remark. It was just one of the more recent experiences I've had, and as someone who doesn't particularly spend a lot of time tinkering on their network, when that system goes down, the whole network goes down, and it's just a pain. I don't need more to do though this weekend, and now I'm thinking that on my to-do list is maybe playing around a little bit more with Security Onion. So, yeah, I know. I've got some kids are going to be busy with a craft fair, so I kind of have a Saturday free, and I already had it laid out with all the things I'm going to do. So it's going to be tempting to not deviate from that. Let's see. I think looks like that's it for questions. Anything else that you want to cover? I want to be cognizant of your time. I know we're now a little over the sessions, so at least what we originally talked about an hour. So let me know. Otherwise, it's probably safe to
I think we covered the highlights,
Yeah.
and just want to say thanks again for the invitation and the opportunity to be on the show, and appreciate all that you do.
Yeah, well, same here. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and spend a little over an hour with me and with everyone else here. Really appreciate that, and everything that you've done over the years. It's also, of course, great to get a chance to chat with you, um, even if it's virtual. It still is really awesome. So, if there's anything I can do now or in the future, don't hesitate to reach out, and hopefully we can do this again in a few months or a year or whatever. I don't know how much live stream energy I have in me, but I'm trying to make this a more or a more regular thing, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, would love to do it again.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Doug. Looks like there aren't any questions. Last call. Otherwise, I think I'm going to hit that end stream button. We'll call it a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Have a great weekend.